Havens. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest is Thomas Frank, author of Pity, the Billionaire, The Hard Times Swindle, and the Unlikely Comeback of the Right. Last month, conservative radio talk show host Glenn Beck gave Rick Santorum a ringing endorsement on his program, comparing Santorum to George Washington.
I don't endorse candidates. I don't get involved in politics. I don't make donations to any politician. Rick Santorum is a friend of mine, but I choose my friends carefully. And I would never tell you that somebody is a friend of mine if I didn't have great respect for them. I will tell you this. People ask me all the time, who is out there? I tell them the same thing. I don't trust any of them. But if I had to trust the reins of power with one person that is currently in this field, and because I think the next president has got to be Abraham Lincoln. He has got to be somebody who knows exactly who he is, knows exactly where he stands, and is willing to, in the end, turn those reins of power back over. The temptation and the pressure is going to be absolutely enormous. If there is one guy out there that is the next George Washington, the only guy that I could think of is Rick Santorum.
And that is Glenn Beck. Talk about the significance of Glenn Beck, forced off of Fox. You're talking about the comeback of the right and the significance of the role he plays, the role the Koch brothers play.
Well, those are some of the biggest actors in what I'm talking about here. But I just wanted I was struck by what Glenn Beck was saying there, that whenever you listen to him, even if it's a short snippet like that, there's always this incredible sense of dread that hangs over every sentence he utters. He said that, you know, the temptation for the next president to not turn over the reins of power back to the public is going to be great. What is he talking about? Dictatorship? That's and Santorum is the one guy in America that can resist the urge to become a dictator. I don't get things like that. I mean, I do get it. I just finished writing a whole book about it. There is a way that Glenn Beck really caught the cultural sensibility of 2009 and 2010. You know, this very unlikely. The first time I ever tuned him in 2008, he was on CNN at the time, and I had the same reaction to him that I just had when you brought up Rick Santorum. It's like, how could this be? You know, who would hire this man to be on television? It just seemed preposterous to me. And he really caught the wave in 2009. That when after the thing that really, you know, the economy fell apart in 2008, and you had the government stepping in with the enormous bailouts, you know, this completely unaccountable just spending of taxpayers' money to get their Wall Street buddies off the hook, you know, stand the banks back up and let them go back to their. And this was a shocking moment. It's the kind, I say in the book that it was the sort of moment that crushes the faith of a nation, you know? And Glenn Beck was there with this very dark vision that he has, where things are always, you know, we're on the verge of tyranny. There's conspiracies everywhere, and there he was with this trademark vision of his, and it really seemed to catch the public mood in those days. And so in my mind, he was one of the most important figures in the comeback of the right, because he really gave the, you know, if you would go to Tea Party rallies in those days, and I went to a bunch of them in order to write the book, the language you would always hear from the podium, the theories you'd hear from the podium, the peculiar ideas, the visions of history that you would hear from the podium were all recycled stuff from the Glenn Beck program. He was really the one with the ideas. The Koch brothers, of course, well, there you're talking about the funding, and the funding is going to become increasingly important as we go forward. But several of the main Tea Party organizations were funded by these two brothers down in Wichita, Kansas, fellow Kansans of mine. And you know, they tend to be pretty much behind the scenes. They don't make a lot of public appearances. They make barely any public appearances. But one of a very interesting Koch document that I came across, it was in their company newsletter. You know, it's not that hard to find. Was one of the Koch brothers saying in either 2008 or late 2008 or early 2009. The sort of characteristic conservative dread of that period, that, you know, the wheels had come off the economy and we were in for another New Deal. If we don't look out, we're going to get another Roosevelt, and he's going to inflict on us a new regulatory state, new, antitrust actions. You're going to see the labor movement come back. It's going to be like the 30s all over again. And the 30s, of course, were a nightmare time for conservatives, and so they reacted to that early, and before we ever got it, before any kind of New Deal ever even got off the ground, they were out there, taking shots at it.
But talk more about the Koch brothers, especially because you are fellow Kansans.
Yes, but I've never met them. I've met a lot of their people. They're everywhere. When you talk to people in Kansas politics,
But the power of their money in politics and why, I mean, you go back to the Depression and Pity the Billionaire, and you were just talking about why there was such a different trajectory coming out of the Depression than dealing with 2008, and the role of the Democrats in taking it off what you see as the rails.
There's so many different ways of looking at that, and the one that always comes back to me is that in the Depression, the entire old intellectual order was discredited. Okay, and the whole sort of civilizational ideal of a figure like Calvin Coolidge was just tossed out the window. The 19th century ideal of the state, the sort of laissez-faire ideal, was destroyed. And Franklin Roosevelt was a great president, but he was also pushed by the intellectual climate of the time, the popular climate of the time, the political climate of the time. And today, though, it seems like, money had a lot of influence back then, of course. You had a figure like William Randolph Hearst, who was very far to the right and was able to mobilize people, essentially choose political candidates however he wanted.
Publisher.
Yeah, he was a publisher of a large chain of newspapers, very similar to, certain people that we have around today. Very similar kind of operation. But for some reason, the money in politics wasn't able to buy its way. You think in 1936, when Alf Landon was a Republican candidate, who was the governor of Kansas, as a matter of fact, not a bad guy ordinarily, but he swung way to the right in 1936 in order to appease his backers, in order to please them and give them let them hear the sort of extreme right-wing message that they wanted to hear. And he lost in this, dramatic landslide. He lost in a huge way. He didn't even win Kansas. That's tough for a Republican to lose Kansas. And even though he had money behind him to a great extent, Franklin Roosevelt was able to get his message across. I don't know if that's going to happen this time around. I don't think it is. Money is playing the game in a much more sophisticated way this time around. You have something like Fox News is a much more sophisticated operation than William Randolph Hearst, although also very similar in all sorts of ways. And you have the super PACs, which we keep coming back to.
What could Obama have done or do now differently? And what do you see?
I don't want to pretend that it's all a matter of rhetoric, but Obama certainly could have. There's all sorts of things he could have done differently. The main one is the bailouts. The bailouts. This was the toxic pill, the toxic medicine that both parties swallowed. And the Republicans, both the people in the Bush administration who devised it, Hank Paulson, and the Democrats in Congress that voted for the TARP. Including Barack Obama, he was a U.S. senator at the time, but then he continued the bailout policies of the Bush administration. He didn't change them. One of the big things that I unearthed that was mysteriously almost forgotten when we were having the bailout debate in 2008 was that we had bailouts in the 1930s. We've been down this road before. President Hoover inaugurated a huge bailout program, and Franklin Roosevelt was highly critical of it. This was one of his big selling points in the 1932 election, was to criticize the Hoover administration's bailout policies as crony capitalism. These are insiders bailing out their friends. And there were some really, really choice examples to choose from back in those days. It was very easy for him to make that case. Obama, by contrast, and then once Roosevelt got in, he kept he kept bailing out the economy, but he did it in a very different way than Herbert Hoover.
We have less than a minute.
I'm sorry.
Keep going.
Okay, what he did was he opposed Wall Street. He said no more money to Wall Street. We're going to rebuild the economy by starting at the grassroots level. We're going to rebuild small financial institutions. Obama, by contrast, just completely kept the Hank Paulson model for doing the bailouts, which is money to Wall Street. Give money to Wall Street.
Could he do anything different now?
I think he could. I think he could. You know, he needs to start getting some of the rhetoric of the Occupy movement in there. You know, he needs to start talking about the 1%. He needs to start talking about what has happened to us and why over the last 30 years.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Thomas Frank, for being with us. Thomas Frank is a columnist at Harper's Magazine. His most recent book is Pity the Billionaire, The Hard Times Swindle and the Unlikely Comeback of the Right. Also the author of, among other books, What's the Matter with Kansas. That does it for our show. If you want a copy, go to our website,